You know, Jack, this is an episode that I've definitely been looking forward to since we first discussed possibly talking about this, and I know that you're interested in this to an extent as well. It's a very interesting topic. Everybody has their opinions on it. There's really good arguments for both ways. We're going to be discussing those today. We're going to be discussing the macro scale. Does history repeat itself on the level of civilizations, and as well as the micro scale within human lives and generations?
I think really you can kind of talk about this in kind of, like you said, scales. First, you got time-wise. You have long scale repeating histories, like hundreds, thousands of years. Then you have certain things like every day, this kind of, whether it's like a financial scheme or whether it's even like weather, you can kind of see that repeating. And then there's political struggles and political uprisings, stuff like that. We can kind of lurk back from history and see that happening.
And that leads us back to like kind of the whole point of this show. Like what are we trying to accomplish here? Like it comes down to the fact that ignorance of the past is blindness in the present. That's really where we're at. It's very important to know the past because we have all of these examples of men and women before us, all of their decisions, and it's all on display. You can find all the history if you look hard enough. And it's really the ultimate act of hubris, or an ultimate act of hubris, for a society or even an individual to think that it is unimportant to know history, because history can really shape the direction of the present, and does. And people that are very knowledgeable of history tend to make better long-term decisions in the present, and especially like famous leaders that knew history tended to be more successful. I know like Napoleon, who was the great general, studied the battle tactics of Alexander the Great and Julius Caesar.
Yeah, and one of the big points that I wanted to hit on, one of the kind of key moments that I think of initially when I hear of history repeating itself is financials. So I really think of history repeating itself as in the Great Depression and, say, the 2008 financial crisis, the housing market crash. Each one of them, you have all this optimism coming in, all these bankers just over-leveraging their positions, and then suddenly this bubble starts to inflate, and then all of it comes crashing down. And you think, hey, there's supposed to be these watchdog groups that are supposed to be looking out for this. The government's supposed to be regulating these people, but they keep on failing. And that's exactly what happened here. I mean, the Great Depression, of course, we didn't have stuff like FDIC yet, because that was in the wake of the Great Depression. And even then, even in 2008, that didn't help, because what happened? The government bailed out the banks. And still and of course the bank's failing, everyone goes to rush to get their money, and then soon we can't give out money anymore. Boom. It just repeats itself. It's like, how can nobody have seen this coming? Well, it just goes to show you that even if you think that something like this, like there's safeguards. Oh, we've been through this before. There's got to be something there to protect us. Well, these things fail. People get neglectful.
Let's actually dwell on that for a minute. Like the example of the stock market. Like, how about people? How about the people that say like it doesn't actually happen the same way every time though? Like we haven't had another Great Depression, and like that was a one-time thing. Like history doesn't repeat itself. Like it doesn't quite get that bad. I mean, there's like a stock market crash, like March of April 2025, like March, April of 2020, or like you can even go way back. Like let's talk about like the panic of 1819 where the banks failed and stuff, but like none of it was as bad as the Great Depression. How would you, maybe that's a proof for history repeating itself, just because like these general things tend to recycle and happen again.
Right. And also I like what you bring about stocks is lot of these people will sell all these guru books saying, oh, if you follow my strategy, because I've studied all the patterns and stuff. But really, that's not how it works. You can't just visualize how the stock market's going to work and just know how it's going to go just because you looked at a stock 10 years ago and said, oh, that must be how it goes.
And the people like the famous supposed prophet who lived like 400 years ago in France, his name was Nostradamus, and he claimed he used like math to try to like foretell the future, and he famously has gotten like a couple things right. So I think everybody looks to him now, even though like 90% of his stuff was wrong. But like that's an interesting point. You can't predict the future off of the past, but at the same time, you're almost more bound to repeat the past if you don't know it. Mm-hmm. Would you say that's true? Is that?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, here's another great example. Think about Henry Ford. You know, New York was supposed to be one of the most dirty and smelly places around because all the horse traffic, they'd leave manure around. So everyone was freaking out. It's like, how are we going to deal with this issue? We have manure piling up. Horses can't get through. Everything's a mud bog. What do we do? Well, they didn't even know about the technological advances that are about to be happening with the automobile. And we kind of see that today, too. We hear all this talk about, oh, the pollution's going to drain up the oceans, and there's going to be global warming, global cooling, wink, wink.
It's just climate change now, just so you know.
Oh, is that interesting? Pick a side, huh? But we kind of see that, too, with, like, electric vehicles. We see solar and such. And all these technologies come in, and we have carbon scrubbers. I mean, the U.S. has pioneered this stuff. I mean, we are one of the most cleanest environments in the world. We're the leading figure of this, and yet everyone's screaming, "Oh, there's going to be a catastrophe. There's going to be manure in the streets. The climate's going to change." But still, they don't understand that. Hey, soon enough, if you have the right incentives, such as in a capitalist society, people are going to see issues, create solutions, and get paid.
I remember reading an article that's actually really fascinating. It was actually quoting a newspaper headline or a series of newspaper headlines from 120 years ago, talking about how like New York and Philadelphia were going to fail because the manure was so bad they could not keep up with the horse traffic in these mega cities and stuff. And like this was like a pressing danger and stuff. And then the automobile rolls along, and like all of a sudden horses vanish. Right? Like in a way, though, could you say like I don't know, history doesn't always repeat itself though, because there are disasters that aren't recovered from. There are the disasters that we do recover from.
It's almost like there's like key factors that you have to look out for, and the aftermath isn't really guaranteed. But there's always something that there's always a point that's hit. Like think about empires, for example. We see stuff like the Roman Empire, the Soviet Union, America. You see all these empires rise and then they eventually fall. Well, what leads to them falling? Whether it's political instability, lowering birth rates.
Economics is usually a really important one.
Yeah. And you see all these precursors come in. And historians get the foreknowledge to say, okay, what needs to happen for this to fall? We knew it fell. Now we got to find the clues to pick this up. And that's where I think historians think that there is a way that history is repeatable and that they can see it kind of culminate in that way.
And it is quite evident, at least nobody can deny that history has repeated itself, generally speaking. Now, the people that are going to oppose that are going to say, well, the circumstances are never the same, so you can never say that it fully repeats itself. And this is true. The circumstances are never identical, but they never will be. But you look, the same kind of events, we're kind of following a more general pattern here. The same kind of events are subsequent to the same kind of events, and they all stem from the same decisions generally made, like printing more money tends to devalue the currency. It doesn't even tends to. That's like a law of economics. It devalues the currency. What ends up happening in the long run, economic instability is what happens. And this is tried and true. Like this is bound to happen. And so in that regard, you can say, yeah, history repeats itself. And we'll get into some more specifics, but let's examine for a minute the opposing view of, well, history doesn't repeat itself. Otherwise, nothing would ever change, and things clearly have changed.
Yeah, you can be snarky about it and say, well, this person wasn't alive this time around, or, well, it's the different year. Obviously, that's the case. But you can always cherry pick. You can kind of say, oh, well, this didn't happen the exact same way. So really, you don't have to look at it through a micro lens. You have to kind of look in a bird's eye view at this and see what's going on in the chessboard here. Do I see some repeatability? And I think really the opposing narrative to history repeating itself is that we can't look back and know exactly what's going to happen. Moreover, we can only see it happening midway or in the aftermath of it happening.
We can really just draw correlations between the past and like what is similar about our circumstances to the past to know if similar outcomes are going to come. That's the sort of angle that I think Jack and I are agreeing on here. But there's some valid objections though to this, like people who are like technology. People are having to face new moral dilemmas like artificial intelligence. Like we haven't had to really deal with that before. And this is something new that's unrepeatable. We can't look to history. Although I don't think that holds water against the belief that history can and does repeat itself. We're not saying it has to because there's free will, but human nature doesn't change.
And let's jump into this here. Think about like stuff like the Black Death, the Spanish flu, and COVID-19. You see all these illnesses come about. And yeah, illnesses, they make you sick, they make you die. Obviously, that's going to happen again. But in the way that it just ravages through a country, a nation, the world, it's very interesting, especially when you see that there's these time jumps that are very interesting. You see them almost like they're like pre-planned out, like nature itself is planning out these almost like ravagings. The repeatability that you see is obviously you got like Black Death, Spanish flu, COVID, you see all these people dying massively. It's not controllable. There's social upheaval. And then you also see kind of the recovery. It's very similar. I think that's an example where you can't really say this led up to this happening. Of course, we always knew that these dangers existed, but how do we know that this is going to be like a huge event? How do we know that these are going to be so contagious, so deadly? You can't really predict that.
You definitely can't. And in the event that it happens, you can only look to the past. Now, I see an avenue here for like the objection of like technology and even kind of a modernist sort of tendency of just like, well, if we look to the past, technology has never failed us. Like technology only makes things better. You bring up all these pandemics and flus, like the worst ones in the Middle Ages that wipe out like estimates like over half of a continent's population. Like that's insane. Like, but our technology continues to get better, and you look at like modern epidemics and pandemics, and modern medicine has really revolutionized everything. So couldn't this be an argument though, being like, well, history's not repeating itself. We're going to just, or in a way, I guess it is, because we embrace new technology and it gets better. But I don't know, maybe this is a reckless idea, kind of like, you know what, history repeats itself or history doesn't, and we're going to embrace technology.
I like how you bring up technology because there's also some hurdles where history almost like stops repeating itself. Industrial Revolution, for example. Think about like how like the family structure, think about how tradition, all that suddenly starts to kind of dwindle right around that point when you get to see the rise of liberal democracies and the industrialization of society. Suddenly there's a shift, and almost like at this point that's a cutoff for prior histories to really affect certain aspects going into the future.
And this is true, like I guess I think of like how the family unit in the West has been in decline since the Industrial Revolution. Like this isn't something we saw anyone can really find in history, going back that technology has been hard on families. Like, there's no historical precedent for that. But there is historical precedent for what happens when families disintegrate. And you can see this in the Roman Empire. What happens when families disintegrate, society loses its compass, and all sorts of crazy stuff happens. The governments tend to fail. There's general bloating in society, and then society collapses under its own weight or is destroyed from the outside.
Touch on the Soviet Union, because I know you had a great point relating to that when the collapse of the Soviet Union was very scarily similar to how the Roman Empire fell.
Well, yes, very interesting. And kind of like it was a hyper-paced version of what's happening in the West, only the decay in the family and in birth rates that is happening in the West right now happened in this super accelerated fashion in the Soviet Union that nobody talks about. And this is right after the Bolshevik Revolution. As the communists take power, the first 10 years of control, they institute this radical, crazy liberal policy in which they're just like, you know what? This is everyone's free of we're free of the old Christianity. We're free of the patriarchy. You know, we're free of this serfdom. We're freeing the serfs, although they were merely, in a way, everyone was worse off for this. But what ends up happening is the family unit is destroyed. Government comes in and forcibly destroys families, and they start this big whole thing of trying to get kind of like a Platonic experiment of like breeding of the best. So like family units vanished, and you just had all kinds of immorality everywhere to be found. Kids were not raised by their parents. There was no such thing as marriage anymore. Divorces were handed out super easily. The state actually, for a little while, I believe, refused to recognize marriage civilly. And one of the big things was state-sponsored abortion. And there was insane cases of women having 80 to 100 abortions in a single year. Like, what happened is there was a 10-year period where all of a sudden no kids were born in Russia. Like, there was almost no one born. Now, what's interesting, though, is, history was kind of stumped or vanquished there, because when you get to that point societally, you can't recover. But the Soviet Union did recover, but that's purely because of the power of the government. They saw what was happening, and they were at least intelligent enough to super quickly change direction and change course before it completely ended society. So within 10 years of this experiment, the Stalin regime pivoted right back to a very more traditional approach to families and stuff. And the Soviet Union was able to recover, and the birth rate recovered enough, although it's getting really bad in Russia again right now, but it recovered enough to avoid collapse anyway.
Mm-hmm. And it seems like ever since the Industrial Revolution, birth rates really never got to pre-era numbers.
Well, actually, the very peak was like when the Industrial Revolution, as we think of it proper, was happening, like the 19th century.
That was
actually the peak in the West of birth rates. Now in like Africa and Asia, in the third world, the 20th century was peak. But in the 19th century, the Western nations had their highest, because I don't know. I don't know the reasons why this was, but birth rates spiked dramatically, and that's kind of what also made that whole era in the 1700s and 1800s very interesting, because you had all sorts of people, and they were overflowing out of Europe over to America, and you had cheap labor, and which is kind of went along with the Industrial Revolution really well.
So if you're a historian and you see the fall of Rome, the fall of the Soviet Union, and then you look at America, we're kind of in a situation like this. Abortion is widespread. The birth rates are low for the really Anglo-Saxon portion of the nation. It's more of immigrants coming in, and they have higher birth rates. So at what point, what's really holding us back? What's holding us back from collapse? Is it just the greatest government structure the world has ever seen? Or is there something that's like holding us together enough where we can continue on? Is collapse coming?
Father Chad Ripperger has a really interesting point about this, because that question has been posed to him. I guess I'll just agree with him. I'm definitely not smarter than him. And he says it's technology. Right now, our families are so weak, our society's so weak, men in general are so weak. We cannot if our technology failed us, society would end. We're like kind of living in this fake artificial, like we're surviving on the old embers of Christendom because technology is propping us up enough. And technology is losing that capability because our depravity is accelerating. But America is in a really difficult position because unlike Rome, unlike the Soviet Union, we don't have a government autocratic enough to enforce a change of things. So we're actually in a very dangerous, perilous spot because Soviet Union, they had a strong enough government, they could force things to change. Okay, they can take away abortion and stuff. Our government right now does not have that power to take it away, and neither the willingness to. I think there's many elites that would love to see us perish as a nation, as a society.
I think technology too. I like that you bring that up because it's scary to look at. You know, I never grew up with an iPad straight from like childhood. I wasn't sat in front of a TV all day. You know, I got to run out and do stuff. But now it's like I see kids as young as 4 with phones. How in the world? I think almost you're a failure as a parent if you need to babysit your child with an electronic.
How did every single other person in mankind grow up without it? I mean, it's clearly possible to do it. And it's also like the studies are just coming out now on the negative impacts, technology has on you.
And it's crazy that they see this and it's like, oh, anxiety and all these mental disorders are just popping up, flaring up. All this confusion, these mental illnesses. And they're like, what's going on? I saw a congressional hearing here in the U.S. where I believe it was Mark Zuckerberg was on there. And one of the congressmen was like, so what do we do? How do we stop this? And really, none of them really knew the answer. And the answer really is to get rid of it all. If you can't stop all these issues that suddenly pop up all of a sudden just because we're on our phones all day, maybe it's just complete eradication. Just get rid of it.
I would love to harp on like social media as the worst of it. And of course, there's going to be people who are going to point their fingers and be like, like technology, like, hey, you guys are on technology right now. Nobody would be listening to the 2 trade school trads right now if you weren't on technology. But my answer is it's like, we have technology, so we'll use it. But I would be happy if technology like went away, like if, especially like, the social media, even video gaming, if all that went away, like our society could benefit immensely from that. And I think history hasn't quite had enough to hasn't had that enough, but you can compare it to like drugs because it has a remarkably similar impact on the brain. So we can look to history to that. I mean, heck, there were wars and societal rot over that in the past.
And that kind of point of no return. I talked about the Industrial Revolution and nothing was the same after. Same with technology. Once we got to a certain point, we just have to live with it. We can't take it away anymore. That answer that I said, we got to get rid of it all. We can't do that. It's just impossible. It's ingrained in us. We need it. I mean, it is one of the most helpful tools that we have. We can't survive without it. Well, we can survive, but we cannot thrive as we once were. We have all these ambitions that are just accelerated through it. But at the same time, devices and just gross misuses of it are just widespread. And you can't really deter that any more than, like you said, Alan, the U.S. government saying, oh, we're going to get rid of all these things authoritarian style.
There's really no easy solution to this. Jack, can you imagine what would happen or how our generation would react if smart technology vanished somehow? If someone could flip the switch and no devices worked anymore, no smart devices, no computers, no TVs, no phones, if that ceased to exist, how would our generation react to that, you think? I think there'd be despair everywhere. Everyone would be...
I'd say it'd start with mass panic.
Definitely, within the first hour.
Yeah. Well, the thing too is you think about if we are going like bare electronics, think about vehicles, electric fuel injection. We don't use any carburetors in any vehicles anymore. You think about like you
Or
think
if you
about
just mean if electricity failed in general,
right.
we wouldn't have lights, like, yeah, all the things. But
We don't have enough horses to plow the fields.
there'd be starvation for sure. And I think the panic of and the isolation that would occur instantaneously, because everybody can only, like, everybody only talks, or basically everybody only talks to people through their devices anymore. Like the amount of words texted by a Zoomer versus spoken. I've seen stats about that, and that's devastating actually for it, just in general terms of human society and interaction. It's insane.
Yeah, think about how many people that is their social life, is the interactions that they have via technology. Think about all the people that spend day in and day out talking to people on their phones, calling people. And it's like, what do you mean I have to go out? I mean, I think there would be even just loneliness. All your friends are gone. All these connections that you made via technology gone in an instant.
There'd be more depression maybe without technology almost at this point.
Right. And I think
in the short term.
yeah, I think that's a good point of like, what is the point of no return? I think we're well beyond it.
And the other thing you brought up, which is interesting, is the birth rates in our nation. Yeah, like, let's talk a little bit about that, Jack.
Yeah. Really, to bring that back, we're at a point where it is inaffordable to have a child. It's inadvisable because let's say, you both want to work on your career. Oh, and then you both want to save up for a house, and then time passes and passes, and then fertility gets dwindled down, and then suddenly it's not easy to get more than 2-3 kids, and two's breaking even. Most
Actually, technically, I think not. What do they say the replacement rate is? Like 2.1.
you even need more.
Or something like, yeah.
Oh, to make up for
yeah,
others.
yeah.
But how do you get back to that? And you can say the easy thing and say just reject modernity and embrace tradition. But really, it can't. It's a hard question, and I think it really starts with a centralized focus on family. If that is the most important thing in your life, then it doesn't matter how much money you have. You'll survive. You'll make it. You'll want to have kids, and it doesn't need to be 16, but still, it almost seems like societally it is career focused. It is worldly possessions that are focused on.
And it's short-sighted.
Right.
I have lots to say about this topic too. Let's table this to another episode actually, just kind of about our takes, I guess, as Zoomers on the societal decline and on families and stuff like that. Let's table that to the next one. Let's get back to our original point here. How much does human nature really have to play in all of this? I would say human nature in history repeating itself is the defining factor. Why I would claim that history can and does repeat itself.
Think about what drives man. You have money, you have power, you have prestige. And you look at the rise of these leaders. What do they want? They want to conquer. They want to be world renowned. They want to be put in the history books. Those are kind of the basic things in what kind of motivates people, that human nature, like you said.
They want a legacy for certain. That's a big thing. And yeah, the drive for like money and power, that's always there. It's always a flaw of human nature. And that tends to lead to the same kind of things all throughout history. You go way back, there's corruption in governments. Back in ancient Egypt, can you believe it? Like, there's corruption in governments today. There's no government without corruption today. There's all these ways that I would attest history really repeats itself and really goes in cycles. Like, contemplating the macro scale now, like you look at civilizations in general, you look at ancient Rome, Ancient Rome had a very noble, valiant starting. It was pagan. It kicked off, there was strong family and community ties there. Like there was a proud patriotism. Virtue was esteemed widely, publicly. There was a great emphasis on the intellectual and on the genius. There was great works of art and literature coming out of this time frame. And due to this success, due to the coherence of their society and due to how well it worked, Rome was successful. Rome conquered the majority of the known world. But then it reaches its natural extent, and it kind of sits there for a little while, all right? The government grows, the government fractures, and there's revolution, and the government turns into an empire. So no longer do we have this republican experiment. All of a sudden we have this autocracy imposed, almost totally, but not entirely. And then this coincides with a breakdown in the family. And then the autocracy kind of holds things together during the decline, and then it all collapses. Would you say the same thing is going to happen in America, or is happening?
Yes, I would say so. I think it's truly a Western-specific trait. There is a spirit in our people where we want to lead, we want to expand, we want to refine the arts, become intellectual, grasp nature, the natural and the supernatural, come to a real apex. But once we get there, almost it's like you said, we stagnate. We can't build any more great, marvelous buildings, great, marvelous architecture. At some point, the spirit starts to dimmer. And in that weakness, suddenly it's, well, we're so great.
Let's live in luxury.
And let's just enjoy ourselves. Let's say, hey, we did it. We made it. And then it's like, what else do we have? What else do we have to aspire to be?
It seems that when people get to that point where they are no longer pushed, there's no longer a drive, they just look back at their accomplishments and are filled with pride and see, look at all we've done. It's kind of like the parable in the Gospels, like the barns are full, let's eat, drink, and be merry. Like this kind of like, it's a spiritual malady that can affect a culture. It's very true in the West. You even see this before Rome. So this has already happened. You see this in Greece, in Athens. Okay, Athens had their start. I mean, they had a very good, solid culture, very productive culture, and they experimented with democracy. They had a sort of republic set up. It didn't last. The people got entitled. Society began to decay within 100 years in Athens. It went really quick. Athens ended up turning into an autocracy with a dictator. It was actually the rule of 3 men at one point. I think it was the rule of 300 men. I'm going to have to study up again on my Greek history, but it devolved into an oligarchy, and Athens never got that golden age back that it had, at its pinnacle. Athens got satisfied with itself, and so it fell, and Athens no longer became a big player on the world stage. Rome perhaps was able to sustain longer because they had so much wealth, money, technology. Rome was the the summit of technology on earth at its time. So I mean, a big empire can sustain itself in some ways like that. America, I think.
And I really like the question you pose. Where are we kind of at this point? And when you say the words history repeating itself, one of the key things that you think about is every empire rises and falls. And America is no different. And I think what we kind of discussed today is that once you get to a point where there is no more golden ages, there is no more expansion, we have gotten to the best of the best. We're no longer creating great cities. We're only maintaining them, keeping them from rotting, decaying. We're just fighting that. Once that decay starts to happen and it's just skeleton crews keeping it alive as much as you can, that's the beginning of the fall.
That is the fall. We're already there in a way. Once a society has turned in on itself like that, I would attest there's no return. And America's on the same level as Rome in that we are really the center of the world in a lot of ways right now. And like, who's going to fill the void? of an America that can't sustain itself.
And I think you said there are limiting factors. There are things that can kind of delay the inevitable. Technology is huge. I think technology is really the only thing that's kind of keeping us alive. This
Definitely.
advancing of technology, we talked about artificial intelligence, this kind of develop it, keep growing it. But at some point, there's going to be nothing left to develop. There's going to be nothing more that we can do. And then the decay sets in, and then the empire falls.
And you even have valiant men. You can go back to Rome. You have valiant men that even come into the highest points of power that try to reverse the tide, but history has never history has smiled on them, but in the end they haven't been successful. I think of a man like Constantine in the Roman Empire, who he rebuffed the borders, he rebalanced the budget, he rebuilt these grand buildings in Rome. He tried to get culture going again, but once this spiritual malady has infected the people, the society is all but dead. The exterior of the building might stand for a long time yet, but you're losing up the support holding up the roof. It's going down the hole. One thing I want to bring up is a really good evidence for history repeating itself is that nobody can name a brand new philosophical idea that modernity has brought up, because all of it is based on a philosophy that dates back at least a couple of millennia. There's no brand new philosophy. You can go into the theology department and maybe find something, but from pure human rationality, all of it if not the same, a basically identical predecessor exists in the past. We really are no different. We are the same humans. Our circumstances have changed due to technology, due to the choices of others, but really cycles are the same because human nature is the same.
And I think that's true because I saw something about this idea posed. It was, how much more music can we produce before it starts repeating itself? At what point will music no longer expand? It'll just be the same thing over and over, but just different words, different chords, different keys.
The music one is a really good idea. Yeah, nobody can invent a new chord. You're just reusing the chords that have always been there. Music can't change. Math can't change. I mean, we can discover things, in the science, we can discover things, but we're still left with the same elements. At this point, the only elements getting added are those that we can make for a fraction of a second in a lab somewhere. I think the last one was made by Russians in a lab for a 60th of a second or something rather bizarre. In a way, we are restrained, and I think our society has to come to grips with this. Human nature, especially due to our fallenness, we are really shackled. We are restrained. We're gonna keep on repeating our own mistakes, and it might just get worse as our technology gets better in a way. I mean, just think, let's throw out the idea nuclear war or genetic, or what are those actual microbial attacks on a society? What's that called, Jack?
Biological warfare?
Yes, biological warfare. There. I think there's a lot more human misery ahead. We're simply learning the same old truths that humans can hate and do a lot of evil to each other, no matter what the circumstances are. And we ought to look to the timeless and the unchanging to avoid these cycles.
I think really the point that we're trying to make here is that there is repeatability. There is a finite amount of events and occurrences, but really the only thing that changes is the extremes, the results, the consequences.
Luckily, we have free will as humans as well. So we aren't utterly stuck in this perpetual hamster wheel cycle. There is a way out. And I mean, the circumstances will always be different, and they actually can never be identical because of that free will. But the same mistakes tend to be made because of our fallen nature. And I think that's what it comes down to. Societies mature, rot, and decline the same way because the same human nature is at work there. And unless we rise above it, history is definitely going to be repeating itself in the future.
I think that's a good place to wrap up. Thank you for joining us on Two Trade School Trads. And until then, Ave Ave.
Christus Rex.